Hello, it's week 27 of season 5 of the Andy Griffith Show. This week's episode title is Aunt B's Invisible Beau. Barney, Aunt B is packing a suitcase for Ultie to go spend the night at Johnny Tall's house. And then Ultie leaves, and Helen comes over for coffee on her way home from school teaching. And Andy brings up the possibility of their going out tonight, but then he realizes that would leave Aunt B at home alone. So he invites her along. And then Helen says, or we can all just stay here. So that's what they all do. They play Scrabble after supper, and then they sit out on the front porch together. And the next morning, Aunt B is telling Clara in the kitchen about her nice evening she had last night with Andy and Helen. And then the butter and egg man, Mr. Hendricks, comes by with his delivery, and he also brings Aunt B a little egg timer as a gift. And after he leaves, Clara asks how Andy and Helen are doing, and Aunt B says very well. And she thinks they might be making an announcement soon. And Clara says she wouldn't think so, 'cause with Ultie getting older and gone more, and with Aunt D and Andy and Helen spending evenings together so Aunt D won't be alone, Andy would feel a sense of obligation to Aunt D and not marry Helen. And then Clara leaves. And then Andy gets a call that Opie's going to stay a second night at Johnny Paul's house. So Andy, for that second night, invites Aunt B over to Helen's. He was planning on going over because Helen's having her Sunday school class over. But Aunt D says no thanks. And Andy says it's silly for her to spend the evening alone. And she says she has a date with Mr. Hendricks. And Andy tells me that in the courthouse. And I say, no kidding. So Aunt D has got a boyfriend. Ain't that wonderful? What'd you say his name was? And Andy tells me, Orville Hendricks, the butter and egg man from Mount Tylet. And I say, oh, local boy's not good enough for her, huh? He buttered her up, and she egged him on. And Andy tells me he's never met him. He doesn't know what he looks like, how old he is, or how long they've been going together. And I say, Andy, this woman is your aunt. You don't know much, do you? He says she's a grown woman, and I say, grown women are the most vulnerable. You happen to know how many con men are operating in this country this very minute? A smart operator could take every dime she's got. And I want to tail this guy for a few days and get a character report on him. That way we know a lot more about him than we do now. And Andy says no, the guy just sells butter and eggs, and he's harmless. And I say, that's the kind you gotta watch out for. Those are your true schizophrenics. So against Andy's wishes, you go find this guy's truck over at the filling station and walk up to it. But on that particular day, his son is delivering the route, not him, because he says his daddy is spending the day with his mom. So I go to Andy in the courthouse, and I make him promise not to get excited or violent, and I say, hold on to your seat. This guy is married. And I tell him I heard this from Hendricks' own son. And Andy agrees with me. Then he needs to go tell Aunt D. So that night after supper, he sends Ultie out, and he asks Aunt D how much she knows about this guy, Mr. Hendricks. And at first she says this is kind of personal, but Andy pushes it. And Andy says, you've only known this guy a short time, and I'm kind of concerned that y'all are already so close. And he suggests that she and he double date with him and Helen one night. And she says, okay, some night we'll do that. And the next day, Andy and Helen and I are in the courthouse talking about this. And I tell Helen, get a load of her nephew standing right here. Boy, for the life of me, I can't figure you out, Andy. If Aunt Dean was my aunt, I wouldn't be staring out of windows. And Helen suggests that Andy and I go up to Mount Tylet and find Mr. Hendricks and tell him to stop seeing Aunt D. So y'all start going up there, and but before you get there, the audience sees that Mr. Hendricks has been getting a bunch of complaints about cracked eggs because his son has been driving the truck so recklessly. So when y'all get there, Mr. Hendricks thinks that's why you're there. Yeah, while I wait in the car, Mr. Hendricks tells Andy, when you drive around from house to house, it's bound to happen every now and then. And Andy thinks he's talking about his seeing women on the side while being a married man. And Mr. Hendricks says to make up for it, next time I'm going to leave Aunt D an extra dozen white eggs free of charge, and a pound of sweet butter too. And Andy says, are we talking about the same thing? And that's when Mr. Hendricks finds out that Andy thinks that he, as a married man, has been seeing Aunt D. And Mr. Hendricks says there's absolutely no truth to that. And just to be safe, and to stop the false rumors going around, he says they better find a new butter and egg man from now on. And Andy says, okay, sorry it had to turn out this way. And then he comes back out of the car. He won't talk about it. And I say, okay, Andy, keep it to yourself. Keep all the good stuff to yourself. And we drive home. And Andy sees Clara come out of this house. And she asks whether Andy and Helen might be making an announcement now that Aunt Dee has a boyfriend and Andy and Helen have had more time alone. So Andy is starting to see what's been going on. And he goes in and tells Aunt Dee he just came from Mr. Hendricks, and he asks her what made her think that she was interfering. And he assures her that if he and Helen ever get married, Aunt Dee will keep living with them. And then a new butter and egg man turns out to be single. We'll see you next week for episode 28.